Thank you guys for coming. So we're going to be talking about Proposition 11. And to get started here, we're going to welcome, I'm going to do a little presentation for a few minutes, just kind of going over some of the details and facts about Prop 11. Notice some other town halls, debates and stuff that sometimes there's questions that aren't really over against, it's just information that people are asking about it. So I kind of want to cover that stuff up front. So we get to the point of actually kind of discussing the opinion one way or another as to why this might be good or not. We kind of got past some important details. So we'll move on. Okay, so what is Prop 11? So it's a ballot question. It's going to appear on your November ballot. Basically asks, do you want to form a school district out of these 6 cities of Lehi, American Fork, Highland, Alpine, Cedar Hills, and a small part of Draper, Leeds, Sunwest, or parts of it. That's not even all of it. So that's what the ballot question is, okay? It's just the residents of those areas that will be voting on that specific proposition. There's also a proposition to the west of us that is called Proposition 14, and that involves Saratoga Springs, Eagle Mountain, Cedar Ford, and Fairview. And they will be voting specifically on their vote, okay? So many times some of the questions that come up at this point is, well, what does that mean if one thing or another passes? How does that affect everything, right? So, well, actually, let's start. Here. Where did this all come from? Okay. So in April, the city councils of those various cities that we talked about, they got together and initiated an interlocal agreement to, for the purpose of putting this on the ballot. They wanted to see if the citizens wanted to do this. The city councils in themselves could not do it. They require the citizens to vote on it to be able to do this. Then, after the 45-day comment period, all the cities had a 45-day comment period. They had open houses and different opportunities for citizens to give feedback about that. They voted on that, and all the different cities that participated unanimously voted to say, yep, we want to put it on the ballot. Okay? So that's kind of where this came from. This came from the cities, the city councils of the cities that were deciding to do this. Did not come from the school district. School district was kind of working on some of its own stuff. I'm sure we'll hear a little more about that as we get into the discussion, but to give you the details on that. Okay, so one of the questions that comes up sometimes is, what about Orem, Pleasant Grove, Linden, Vineyard? What about those guys? Like, they don't have anything to vote on that. That is true. And that basically is because their city councils did not vote to put something on the ballot. So the way that the law is structured and the way that it functions is different cities or groups of cities can hold a vote to form their own school district if they want, but that doesn't mean everybody else that's in the district that they currently are in has a vote to say whether they can do it. It's basically a vote of, are we as citizens in this group wanting to go form our district, okay? So that's basically it. Okay, so what does this mean? How does this work? So I kind of put down a few things here to kind of help you understand different scenarios that are possible outcomes. One thing to remember, one thing to know up front is if either of these propositions pass, that means a new school district will be formed, and whatever is left automatically will be formed into another new school district. Alpine School District will cease to exist once that transition is done. And there's some specific reasons for that. The legislature adjusted the law recently to do this, and I think it was in a lot because of how the Canyon's Jordan School District split went, which honestly was kind of the wild west back then. There was very little direction in state code on how that's supposed to happen, and so it was a very rough split. I think everybody agrees on that. And so the legislature put it in more detail, and one of those things is that if a park breaks off, the remaining school district doesn't remain as the same entity. There's some important reasons for that, including, if the district has title and stuff, if it has, contracts or, other debt, other things that the name is attached to it, it gets it complicated if that entity remains around. But if the entity goes away, you have to take all that stuff and split it around and stuff. It just makes for a smooth transition. And then this is kind of what I've heard in talking to legislators to, put this through. Okay, so if they both pass, there'll be a West District, there'll be a Central District, and then the South will have, as the remainder of Alpine School District. Okay? If 11 passes and 14 doesn't, then the Central will be a district, and the West and the South will be a district. They'll be a district together, which will be a little odd, but that's a possibility. Now, if our proposition here fails, but Prop 14 succeeds, then the West will be a district, and then the Central and the South will become a new district. And obviously, if neither one of them succeed, they both fail, Alpine School District will continue as a district. So that's kind of how that works. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about timeline. Many times people are questioning, how does this come out? What happens when? So we kind of put together a timeline so you kind of understand what's going to happen. This is actually a little longer timeline than the Jordan Canyon District, which is good. I think having a longer timeline helps the transition better. So this November 5th, we will be voting on this on ballot, and then we'll see what the result is. If either one of those passes, then we'll move into the next part of this. In the spring, the county commission will determine what the new school board district boundaries are for the new districts, okay? Because we have the existing school board, but that's the old district. There's different stuff for a new district, and so a different entity has to do those initial boundaries. That's the commission to do that. Then in the summer of this next year, those who want to run for school board seats in those newly becoming districts will file. Then next November 4th of 2025, during municipal elections, you will vote on the initial set of board members for the new districts being created. Now then, in January, it might actually be a little sooner than that. In all this stuff, the legislature can kind of tweak things when they go, oh, we better do this. I've heard that the legislature is looking at making this so fairly soon after, if we have new districts, fairly soon after those elections, they want to basically be able to enable those board members to start maybe going sooner than later. So they might do something like, a couple weeks after the election or something like that, they officially, start acting as board members in those new districts. So that may be adjusted. And then push forward, so then they have basically a year and a half to July 1st, 2027 to hire a new superintendent, hire a business manager, start looking at staffing their district, and then July 1st of 2027, so about 3 years from now, a little under 3 years from now, those new districts will start operating, and shortly after that, they would start teaching classes as the new district. So that's what that schedule looks like. Okay. What about your kids? What happens to your kids during this time? Okay. So before that July 1st, 2027 deadline, everything's going to kind of stay the same. If there's boundary changes for schools, which could happen, then we have an operating district in the meantime, you're gonna just follow the normal mode of operation. Go to the schools you're assigned to. If you're going to a different school because of arrangement one way or another, you continue to do that. Okay? After that time frame, parents can still choose to have their students attend those schools for some time after. I think there is some limitation, but honestly, there already is a lot of flexibility for students to attend out of their district, and that those conditions still apply. There's limitations and rules around that. If you have specific questions, I'm sure many of the people here can include you in on that. But there's still flexibility, but there definitely is the opportunity for you to continue to attend the school that you were attending before the split. And I believe you can even attend. So say, for example, you have a student that currently stays like in fourth grade, okay? So by the time 2027 comes around, they're going to be going into junior high or middle school. That still continues on that. If they have been targeted to go to a particular school, even after the split, they can still choose to go, hey, I still want to continue to go to school we would have gone to if we didn't split. So there's lots of flexibility for parents, and that's great. Okay, just some kind of general numbers around, how does this divide kind of look like, right? So you kind of see that the rough number of students, and these are kind of, at least the student numbers, it's a very rough estimate or estimate right now. It's probably different because I think these were from like last year or the year before. And we're growing, and so those numbers change. But I went and looked at where all our different schools are on the current Alpine School District map, and so that's kind of how they break down as to where they are right now. So you can kind of see the number of high school, junior high school, elementaries, and how that will kind of boil down into new districts. If it was central and south, and west was breaking up, you can obviously just take those numbers and combine them. That's kind of where we'd be at. Okay. Now we're going to move into our discussion of the big portion. So hopefully that initial information is helpful to kind of give you some bearings, some idea of kind of where we're at with stuff. But let me introduce who we're going to have talking today and discussing this more in depth. So we have Michelle Stallings from the Lehi City Council. Oh, and one thing I want to state up front for everybody, and this applies to all those participating, they are participating here as individuals. They are not representing the various organizations. They are not speaking on behalf of the various organizations that they work for. They are here as citizens, just like the rest of us, and they are bringing their opinions and their kind of view and how they see things, and hopefully to help us have a variety of ways to look at this issue and be best informed as we go to the ballot box to make our personal decisions as we vote for this. So we have Michelle Stallings from the Lehi City Council. We have Wendy Hart, who is a former school board member from the Alpine School District. They're going to be both in the for side of this, and those opposed, we have Dr. Joe Jensen. He is the Director of Administrative Development. Administrators Development, make sure you get that right. I had to abbreviate those slides. But in Alpine School District, we appreciate being here. And then also Kevin Thomas, who is the Director of Human Resources at Alpine School District. So we'll invite them up now, and then we can get going on this. What we're going to do here is our format for tonight's discussion is we're going to have each side start with 5 minutes, just kind of doing an overview of their position, why they think they're for or against it. Then we're going to move into some questions. I've got a few questions that have been submitted to me. I'm going to pick up some questions. We don't have a lot here. And then we'll allow 2 minutes for each side to answer the question, and then just a 1 minute rebuttal after that. And we'll alternate who's starting for each one, like has been done before. At the end, we'll give each side a couple minutes to kind of do a summation on their position. Sound good?
We'd love to start.
You want to start? Okay, go ahead.
And are you going to give us a timer or anything?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for being here, you guys. I had a chance to talk with these two before, and we talked just a little bit about Mr. Brooks, and he's written a lot about his concern that we have created an unhealthy political culture of contempt. And he encourages us to get back to a place where we can disagree better without hating people who hold opposing people. One thought from his book, he wrote, if we want more unity and less contempt, we need to get out of our comfort zones, go where we are not welcome, and spend time talking and interacting with people with whom we disagree. Not on light stuff like sports and food, but on hard normal things. And as far as that quote goes, I'm definitely out of my comfort zone, so I'm kind of here. And, I think you'll find, and congratulations for being here tonight, right? You're here because you're doing exactly what you suggested. And I don't know Michelle, I just met her tonight. But I do know Wendy's school involvement is remarkable. I'd be curious to know how many thousands of hours she spent in schools over the years. And she spent 8 years on the Alpine School District Board and always provided a diversity of thought that was helpful and valuable. So thank you, Wendy. Also, can I just share a couple of thoughts to frame tonight? I'm grateful that this debate is not about an existential threat. Right? This isn't, we're not determining whether we're going to go to war with Russia or not, right? It's not a world battle. It probably even qualifies as a first world problem. And really, both sides are pursuing the same outcome. I don't doubt for a second that we both want great schools for our kids, right? All of our kids. We just have some different views on the best path of that goal. And interestingly enough, we're actually not even as far apart on this issue as you might think. Kevin and I are actually not against smaller school districts. There are some advantages to big districts, there are some advantages to small districts. But there are some really great advantages to small districts. There really are. If people are willing to pay for it. And tonight I want to tell you how I would be willing to vote for this. So if you came for a cage fight, I don't think you're going to see that tonight, right? However, there are two elements every voter should understand before they cast their vote. First is that smaller districts simply cost more for a variety of reasons. And it's important for me to be upfront about that. Second, there's a probability to a split. It's more than just the financial feasibility, where the unintended consequences should change like this. With that, Kevin is just going to comment quickly on what
Matt, thank you for the presentation to start us off. I appreciate that. To me, this has always been about if I'm going to make a change, I want there to be a reason for that change. And so I've been trying to think, why would you take Alpine District and change it? And so I figured if it's an educational institution, there must be something wrong with education taking place. And I don't think that's true. That's 6 kids go through the Alpine School District, and I find that they've been really blessed by that. And so have my neighbors' kids. And so I started thinking about my neighbors, and then I asked myself, well, who is my neighbor? And it occurs to me that if I'm not as concerned about the kids in Cedar Valley as I am the kids in Warren, as my own kids and my own friends and neighbors, then maybe I'm doing something for a reason that might not be right. And so I really started thinking about all of the implications of a split, and the people that would be most hurt are probably the people that can least afford those things.
30 seconds.
I think I'm giving the time. So
Yeah, about 30 seconds.
Okay. And so to me, there's also, I think John Dewey captured it best. John Dewey was an educator from about over 100 years ago. But he said this: what the best and wisest parent wants for his child, that must be want for all the children of the community. Anything less is unlovely and left unchecked destroys living lives. I think that captured my thought.
5 minutes.
Okay, I'm Stallings again. Lehi City Council, but I represent my own views, and I'm probably one of the reasons we're here tonight, because kind of started this thing. But not really. It started long ago. This is not a new issue. It's been looked at for at least 20 years since I've lived in Lehi. So it's not a big, we've been studying this over time. And why now? Why split now? And as a city council member, I can say that we looked at this thoroughly. We looked at the Alpine School District feasibility study. We hired our own firm to do a study for our own local. Talked to residents. Residents were actually the ones who brought this to me in the first place. It wasn't even on my radar until somebody asked about one of my residents. Why now? Because Alpine School District is not just a large district, it's an enormous district. It has almost as many students as the entire population of Lehi City, which is the largest city in Utah County. It's geographically large, with a lake in the way. It's really hard for some, administrator or where it's only where they're very important to get clear out this report to see really what's going on there. We have a huge diversity of needs in this very, very large district. In the west, we have explosive growth. We need these schools. Those kids are packed. In the east, the southeast, we have declining populations. We have parents that are concerned that their kids are going to schools that are old and seismically unsafe. And yes, the bond was probably a catalyst to really get this going, the failure of the bond. But honestly, who can blame those in or to vote for voting against it to fund new schools in the West when their own children are in schools that they are unsafe? So we have huge differences of needs, and those needs are not being met. And it's not just the failure of the bond, it's little day-to-day issues. I've talked to residents, I've talked to our school board members that represent Lehi, and the problems go to representation. We have the scale is tipped in favor of the east, and not the west, where our needs are. We have, okay, I'll let it. That's okay. I can go on. We can both go on. For me, the difference that a split will make is twofold. It's going to be a difference in representation. Our representation will increase 3 times. We'll go from 7 board members representing 14 municipalities to 21. That's far greater local control. And as Joe mentioned, one of the main things that I ran on, I was looking at my school board was local control. Smaller, closer to the people, those decisions are best made by those that are closest to the people. The other thing has to do with the capital needs and bonding. A lot of things are handled at the state level, and but the bonding issue is one of those things. Bonds are set up where the capital needs for a particular area are handled by that particular local area. And there is accountability in that, and there is also feedback for people because they can say, I spent money to go into debt for this, and I'm getting the feedback. We do have wonderful equalization of education funding throughout the state, but bonding is one of those things that is local and should remain local. So those are the 2 major issues that I think you're going to see. You did mention, is the education poor? That's not why we want to split. I actually believe we're going to see greater resources for teachers because we're going to have greater competition potentially with 3 districts. I think that you're going to see more scalability as far as the focuses of the different areas are going to be focused differently. The West will be able to focus on explosive growth, or will be able to focus on smaller class sizes if they so choose, and our central area can actually spend the time and the energy focusing on the issues that pertain to us. So I think it's more about the local needs are very, very different in those 3 areas. And I think that's why we need to split it. It has nothing to do with the education. And if we were waiting for the education to go south before we implemented this, that would be a problem.
Great, thank you. You guys did great there. Okay, so let's look at some questions here. And unfortunately, I have some questions submitted online, posted online. So Let's look here. I've heard that a split is inevitable in a few years down the road if we stay together. Is that true? If so, why won't the split as proposed now not be available then? So we'll start with the core. 2 minutes.
There are always options to split, as we've seen the city councils can take that. The question you have to ask is, should there be a split? Is there a point to larger always being better? And if not now, why not now? There was a poll that came out just recently, the West, 54% of residents in the West are going to vote for Prop 14. That's what the poll says. It's basically a de facto conclusion that the West is going to split. So the question remains to us in the central area is, what is the advantage to us either separating out with the central district and in the southeast, or is there an advantage in staying together? I don't think assuming that the West is going to stay together is a safe assumption. I think that if you were looking, you take those odds, voting that the West is going to split. Is that?
Just 1 minute. Yep.
So the question is, why not later? Okay, go West Lehi, go Cedar Fort, Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, go visit those classrooms. Those kids can't wait. This is for them. I've heard, our test scores are fine, we're fine. No, we're not. Education is a lot more than test scores. It's their well-being. And I lived in Lehi, my kids went to Lehi High, so I can remodel after remodel, crowding. It was so overcrowded. The kids didn't have time to eat lunch. I know what that's like. And I feel for the kids, and we need to address this now instead of putting it off and kicking the can down the road for more students.
I don't disagree with any of that. You mentioned representation. Last night, I learned something that from, I think it was either Amber or Heather, I think one of them said, Alpine School District has more people per board member than legislators, which have limits. And I also learned that, well, I actually this, it is odd that like the local community doesn't actually have a representative, right, which is weird. So I think those are things we absolutely agree with. John, we also agree. It takes as long to get to Harbor Point or Mountain Trails as it does to get to Emerson Ridge. Right, like it's huge. I would encourage everyone to go and look at the studies. Look at both studies. Look at the city study, look at the NGT study. There's a lot there. I would say go to the findings and recommendations page, especially, or if you're having trouble sleeping, print it and read the whole thing. It's as good as any. But one of the things I would emphasize here is, again, we're not opposed to smaller districts, but how we go about it matters, right? How we go about it, we get one chance of doing this, right? And I think, and I'll just tell you right now, how I would vote for this is if it were advertised carefully, a split is going to cost them per district. Because there's no way, both studies say it will cost them. I'm going to go into detail about that on another answer because I'm out of time. But I would vote for it if you were upfront about saying it's going to cost more, but it'll be worth it, right? And it might, in a few years, be to where we're back to a level of funding where we were in. But initially, it is going to cost.
Okay, so we'll have 1 minute each to respond to what's been commented on, so we can kind of flesh this out. So, 1 minute.
Okay. Yes, I think we've been upfront that it will cost more no matter what. It will cost more for state and Alpine School District. That's according to our study plus historic trends. Alpine School District in the last 2 years has raised our taxes 6 times. This last time it was increased by 12.2%. So if we stay without the high school district, your costs are going up. That doesn't include the bonding that we need. Still need that $6 million bond. That cost will probably go up too with inflation with additional needs as they grow. Our study that we did for our local found that our taxes, and this is actually an NGT study as well, that with the central district, the three-way split, for the central district, our taxes will not go up as much as if Lehi were to stay with the entire east side. So, yes, taxes are going up. That's the reality of life. I can promise you in cities, that's the reality as well, unfortunately. But our taxes will go up less than if we were stuck in a high school district or that the east side.
It's nuanced because as bonds come up, taxes can come up. And so there will be, and especially when a bond is in the past, in order to build that new junior high out west, they had the tax with it because they couldn't do it with the bond, but as they were taxing, that bonds were coming. And so it's a little, you've got to be, completely upfront. But in this study and in the other study, this is a snapshot of time on page 51 to 54, which shows that there will be, if we split right now, just operating costs, it would be $8 million more to run schools in the central district because there's so much money generated because of the huge number of kids out west. So to do the same thing we're doing now, that does not take into account any startup costs. And there's going to be significant startup costs because that doesn't account for startup costs. It also doesn't account for unforeseen expenses. I think everyone's probably done a remodel at some point in your house where you got started, and then we realized, oh my gosh, there were a lot more unforeseen expenses than we realized. And then the other thing is it doesn't account for redundancy, because you do have to have a muscular change. You do have to have a superintendent in each. You have to have a district office. And so there are significant startup costs.
Okay, thank you. With that. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to see when I'll just a little bit.
Okay, I was not talking about bonds. If we, the central district sticks with the east side, as the school board had proposed, it would be a $14.5 million increase. So we're assuming that the west is going to split off. And if we vote this down, instead of an $8 million increase, this is NGT study, which I questioned, it'll be $14.5 million increase. Yes, there will be startup costs. Our study did look at that until the ways to mitigate those costs.
Just to clarify, you're saying the central will have a $14 million increase?
If we have what the school district proposed, option 2, or Lehi, it's Lehi to Orem, MGT said we'd have a $14.5 million increase.
So
if we give our central, it would be.
It's in parentheses, that means it's in days. And I can show you.
Okay. Yeah, right, and you said 8 million for central.
So what's in parentheses, that means it's in deficit.
Right.
That's not an increase, that means it would be 14 million whole.
We'll be in the hole, so we would be $14.5 million.
Right, per year, just to operate exactly as we are. That doesn't include startup costs for the
Right, that's just a snapshot of time, because MGT studies didn't bother to look at the capital needs, future needs, startup costs, and they don't have a lot. But the point is, right, so the point is both studies show that if the central district, if we form our own district, it will be cost us less than if we stay behind.
The MGT study doesn't say that.
That does.
No, if you want, I can show you, it's a $14 million deficit. And I can show you why. It looks, anytime it's in parentheses, that means deficit.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do, which is
Okay. No.
Yeah, okay, so looking at the data right now. So if we went Lehi to Orem, the cost for per, what do they call it, annual cost per household, estimated cost per household would be almost $200, okay, Lehi to Orem. If we did a central only district, that cost would be $155.
Right.
So there is a difference. It would be like an entity shows that it's.
Yeah, I can understand that, but that still doesn't count any of the startup costs or any of the.
No, that's a separate issue. And again, entity didn't look at that. We did. And we still found with our feasibility study that would cost us less.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to the next one. Getting a little bit back and forth here, so. Okay, let's see. Next one. What happens to Alpine School District employees and their retirement? Are they grandfathered in? So I think we start with you. We'll start with against this one.
One of the great mysteries in any change is the thing that we can't account for. There is some legislation that talks about those benefits will continue for at least a year. I know there's talk of extending that to more than just a single year. But the reality is at a certain point, the boards of any new district will be able to make those decisions. Alpine School District has one of the best retirement incentives in the state, and I don't know that anyone can promise that that will continue. And so there will be effects on employees. And I would encourage it. You know, when I have a question about how legislation in the state level might affect a business that we're talking about here, even the school on here, go talk to an educator. Go ask them what they think about the split. Go ask them if they're concerned about benefits. Go ask them if they're concerned about how this will affect them. And talk to your neighbors. Talk to your neighbors in Orem who are wondering how they emphatically said that they didn't want this to happen. Now they'll have a voice. It's an interesting thing. I encourage you to talk to a lot of people because there's a lot of information out there, and most of the time we should have lots of voices.
We still have time.
30 seconds.
Just educator benefits have grown significantly. The health insurance is significantly more expensive than it was when I started 30 years ago. My daughter is a teacher, English teacher at Timberline. My wife is an English teacher at Orange Junior. And I look at my daughter and I worry because she was hired after 2011. And as a result, she's going to have to work for 40 years to get the same retirement that someone who used to have to work for 30 years. And so that it does concern, there is a concern when it comes to some of those things that are unknown.
So I think it's important to know that the people of the central area are very enthusiastic and supportive of educators and education. And because we draw different geopolitical boundaries, that's not going to change, right? There is state statute that does, as was mentioned, that does protect and grandfather teachers and employees. So you are guaranteed a position at the same level that you would have been if you were in the same district. There is, so Julie King, who's one of the ASD board members, currently has been working with the state senator, who already has a little file open to extend those protections out. So there are some issues with retirement, some of these like the OPEB. There are ways of doing interlocal agreements, and the reality is that any district of the three, if you decided to treat your employees poorly, then it's really easy for them to go to the other two districts. And so I think that logically, as a board member in the new school district, you would absolutely be meeting and matching what the others are doing. And I think logically, if I were on the board, I would totally want to match what we have in Illinois. The retirement benefits and everything would stay, I think, status quo or improve. How much time do I have?
You got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. I think you have to look at not just what's the best case or worst case scenario, you have to look at what is the most logical outcome. And I think the most logical outcome is that the board members that we elect will probably want to do right by our employees, because why would you not? You'd be an absolute idiot not to.
Okay, you want to do a 1 minute rebuttal at all?
I agree that the citizens absolutely have been wonderful to educators, and there's no doubt about it. And the reality is that you can have whatever you want if you're willing to pay for it. All of those things will come at a cost. All of those things. She talked about potentially the benefits we could get that could happen, but it will come at a cost. And I think we can expect that.
And then I guess when you one of the things that I think concerns educators, and I hear this often, is when there's a higher cost, there's three ways to address it. You can either increase revenue, you can either cut something, or you can do a mix of both. And so I think the concern is there's going to automatically be an increase in cost because of those things regarding redundancy and regarding the startup costs. And so I think it worries educators that, well, where do you cut then? Do you cut benefits? Do you cut people? And those are some of the concerns.
One comment on medical. There are increased medical costs, and right now the usage, because we're such a large district, is actually going against us. So there are going to be some benefits, potentially with lower usage costs. Again, I think, and I'm sympathetic that anytime there's a change, I've worked in corporate America. Anytime there's a change, it is very difficult. I think we have to acknowledge that the West is leaving. And so the debate here is not about the status quo, it's about, is it better for us to stick with Orem and the South, or is it better to split off? And I think because of the disparate needs of the different areas and the increased representation, I think that it's best to do a three-way split as opposed to two.
You have about 10 seconds.
I agree there's going to be costs. And that those decisions should be up to the board members that are elected. For instance, I know a high school district pay their long-term teachers very well, but we also have one of the highest student-to-teacher ratios. So we got to decide what our priorities, the voters need to decide what their priorities are and let board members to represent what they value.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving along here. So it says, I know Orem tried to split a few years ago, so I assume they're okay with splitting. How does maybe the PG residents feel being lumped into Orem? Obviously, I'll caveat, this is a question from someone who is making assumptions. Orem split did not pass, but Orem did attempt to pass, but we talk about Orem a lot. This actually also loops in PG, Linden, Vineyard, so I think that's some interesting context to talk about. So, yeah, how would those other three cities feel about being lumped into Orem?
I think for one, Pleasant Grove, they were not happy. How do they feel about it? Obviously, they were split. They're heavily subsidized WPUs from other parts of the district. So, in their mind, there's particularly a certain special district that's fighting us tooth and nail to prevent a split. They feel it might hurt Orem. They chose not to enter an interlocal agreement. They chose not to do their own feasibility study. So they don't really know how it will affect them. They're just opposed to it. And one of the school board representatives in that area said they won't allow us to leave. Now, I have none of the problems with that. We're in a bad relationship. Of course, we have that choice. I honestly don't think it will hurt them as bad as they think it will. There's been a lot of fear mongering. She wants to say something. But I think we looked at this, we wanted it to be equitable. And this was the best one. We're dividing the districts. They're going to be large districts, pretty equal size, representing about the same number of schools. This is they have a strong social tax base, they have growth in Vineyard. I think they will do well. I wish they had done their own stuff.
I think you just answered what I was going to say. I think that if you look at it from a 70,000-foot view, and you were to try to say, what's the most equitable way of doing it and dividing things out, and you look at the particular needs and the geography and individuality, I think that three-way split makes the most sense. Vineyard and Orem are very closely linked, Linden, Orem, PG. When I was talking to one of the board members when we were discussing it, they said, would PG stay with Orem or would they go with AF? And just immediately you just go, no, PG would stay with Linden and Orem. There's a logic to that, and I think you just know from being on the record.
So Central's going to be fine either way. My kids go to American Plan for Virginia, I taught at Low Peak. Central's going to be fine either way, truly. But I do worry about my law because I spent 21 years there as an administrator. And I don't think it's going to be as equitable as maybe we might hope. One of the things that I'm especially concerned about is the Alpine School District, by law, had the ability to put this on the ballot. That's why they did the MGT study. The MGT study certainly showed that the two-way split makes the most sense financially and in every other way. Go to the findings and recommendations at the very back of it to read that. And in the middle of the summer, the legislature came in a special session and took away the ability for Alpine to put it on the ballot. And there are reasons, well, I don't remember the reason, but in the process, they disenfranchised 81,000 voters in Orem. And that was a group that 2 years ago voted it down 3-1. It was, if I remember right, it was 72% to 28% saying we don't want to split. So that group has been disenfranchised with even voting on this split. And to me, that's a concern. I think, you talked about representation. I agree that there should be representation, and there's a third of this equation that has no representation. Do you want to say? Go ahead, Martha. Next.
I think the fundamental principle is that and this is across all levels of government, if there is an irrevocable agreement to create a different set of governments, then the people who vote for that principally are, who enter into that irrevocable agreement are the ones that vote on it. And Orem didn't have the West as already splitting out. That is a trigger that is going to reverberate. And part of the question is, should we rip the Band-Aid off all at once and just do a three-way split? Or should we have the West split now and then we kind of piecemeal it over the next several years? I think what's interesting is that Orem, because they have declining enrollment, but they have high tax values per student. So Orem, anywhere in the district, has the highest assessed taxable value per student than any other student in the district. So I think Orem will be okay. The question is, what does Orem want to do to meet their needs? And right now, Orem is very focused on smaller schools, local schools. And that's fine. As you mentioned, there's a cost to that. And Orem should be the one to make that decision for Orem. It shouldn't be on the backs of the people in, say, the Lone Peak area. So I think that what we have here with the three-way split is much more equitable because of the different needs of the three different areas. And what the studies have shown is that all three areas have a tax base that is sufficient to maintain school districts. And we're still going to be the 6th, the 9th, and 10th largest school districts in the state. So,
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Okay, I hear this argument a lot. Orem doesn't vote, they're disenfranchised. Orem voters voted down in Orem only district. So none of the rest of us in the district have a vote on that. We never had a say in that. So it's funny that they're coming back and say they want to say we didn't. They voted down in Orem only, but there are many residents who said we would support a Linden, Orem, Pleasant Grove, Vineyard district. The cities in those, the city councils, mayor in those cities deliberately chose not to allow their residents to be able to vote for that district. they didn't want to hear if the majority of the residents wanted that or not. So the choice was theirs. They decided not to. They are intent on keeping Lehi and the rest with them. And I feel like they disenfranchise their own residents with that decision.
Alpine School District has 2 special schools. One is in the west and one is in the central. There is no special school in the board for our most disadvantaged special needs kids. The one that's right across from A Hospital is called David Peterson. Most of the students attend there are from. So to pretend that this is equitable is to pretend that most of our Title I schools are. That most are, that there's a special school that's already built in the room. There's already a district office in the room. And in that area, it seems a little disingenuous when we talk about the kids that we get the very most. And so I come back to where we started with who's my neighbor. I can see financial reasons to not call some people my neighbor. I have a hard time with that.
Also,
Sorry, you're 1 minute up. Rebuttal. So it's these guys' turn now.
that wasn't our agreement.
That was 1 minute rebuttal, so back to these guys.
So, I got to speak at graduation. Dan Peterson was the best graduate, and I spoke Olympic every, but it was the best graduation. I'm also a parent of a special needs child, so I'm very sympathetic. What we haven't talked about is the ability of interlocal agreements. I can see very easily that we would have an interlocal agreement like where the students in Orem absolutely would continue to go to Dan Peterson. ATEC is in Linden, ATEC East is in Linden, and I can see very easily that we would have our special needs, more adult students going to ATEC in Linden from the Central District. Right now, the people up in Draper come to Alpine School District from Camden School District through an interlocal agreement. That started at least when I was on the board, may have been before then. We have a lot of interlocal agreements that I think are going to continue to happen, and we'll be able to take care of everybody in that.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Okay. So, one of these other questions, I think we already hit on this, but I want to pull out one part of it. And that is around bonding. So, the 2022 bond did not pass. There was a difference across the district in which parts of the district voted for and which ones didn't. So what I want to hear is, do you think that bonding is any easier or less easy if we stay together versus if we split? Does bonding, how does bonding go in this? Because that's a very important aspect of the funding of schools, particularly like capital things. In every single area, if we were split 3 ways, every single area would have capital needs going forward. And we all agree upon that. So talk about bonding, and does bonding get better or worse? What's your opinion on bonding going forward, a split versus non-split? And I think we're starting with you guys, right?
Don't even remember.
Actually, you guys just finished up, so then it's now you guys to start. Yeah, great.
I have an opinion on bonding. Remember, I have 2 main issues that this is going to benefit: bonding and representation. I think a bond is going to be far easier to pass. It was a $600 million bond that failed in 2022. I think it would be far easier to see 3 $200 million bonds passed in 3 different districts because they would be focused on those areas. Right now, the central area, we're in Lehi, so Lehi is kind of an exception to that. But the rest of the central area is mostly not, I would say, not taken care of by bonds. Not because our district and our board don't want to, but it comes down to you've got so much money that you feel you can go to the people and bond for. And you look at these massive needs. You have massive growth out west, you have older schools in Orem, And so that central area is mostly left high and dry. My kids went to Lone Peak High School. Lone Peak has the smallest square footage per student of any school in the district. And Lone Peak and that area, so I live in Highland. Highland City residents, when I was on the board, contributed 9% of the total property taxes that went to Alpine School District. On every bond, we got less than 1% of the bond projects. They refurbished the beginning or the front of Highland Elementary. That was a $50,000 thing, right? And so what I'm seeing is when you see Highland residents or you see Alpine residents not voting for bonds, there's also that accountability metric. So, I mean, having been in Alpine School District, I understand we want to take care of everybody, but it's going to be far easier for people to see the direct benefit, and they will also have that accountability directly back to them, and it'll be far easier to pass along 3 ways.
Just historically, this is since 2000. If you look at the West Interlocal, the Central Interlocal, and the Northern Vineyard PG area, the West Interlocal has had 22 total projects, and those were actually all new schools. The Central Interlocal had 16 new schools and 4 rebuilds plus 6 remodels. So that's a total of 26. And then the Lindenor Vineyard PG area had a total of 3 new schools and 17 total projects, 8 rebuilds, 6 remodels. I would say, and go do your homework, you can find this on the Alpine School District website. Go look at the bond projects that we've done. Alpine District has been exceedingly responsible of doing bond projects where needed, when needed, and all 3 areas have benefited a lot. It's an interesting question because maybe it is easier to bond if they know it's really staying local, right? But that being said, historically, who has passed bonds, you can go on the election website and look at the 2022 bond and other historical bonds. Orem has passed bonds. American Fork is pretty heavily for bonds. Where it has not passed, and you go precinct by precinct, is in Highland and Alpine, which is just, it's curious. And it might be partly because of, they don't feel like, but they also generally have new schools in the last 2 years, most of them are some of them, right? But it is interesting to look at that. So I'd say do your homework with the Alpine record of that, but also realize that the cities who have passed bonds are Alpine and Highland.
It works until it doesn't. It didn't work. The PG has made it clear in public meetings as well as private conversations that the West let them run their own road, except we want their money. So they want our money. This goes back to representation, right? If they can outvote us, Lehi will become the new West. We will be neglected. We will not get our schools built that we need because we will not have the votes. We will be outvoted and we will have the representation.
30 seconds. I now lost my train of thought. I think even though there were bond projects that were done in Highland and Alpine, if you look at the dollar amounts, they were very small. There was Alpine Elementary that was like, I think it was, might have been up to 100,000. The Highland Elementary was 50,000. The actual dollar amounts are not being spent in that area. The reality is that Orem and Lehi were the reasons that you could pass bonds. And so if Orem doesn't pass a bond, then it's not going to pass. You have to have Orem and Lehi and the rest of the cities. It doesn't matter.
You're good? Okay.
Got a couple questions here. Let's see.
So one of the things that's kind of been brought up, and we've touched on it, I don't think we've talked in depth very much about it, so let's talk about that real quick, and that is the representation in Alpine School District. As you all know, school board seats are based upon population. But because we have differences in the amount of students in our various populations from west to south, the amount of students that each board member is actually representing, and thus, in many ways, the number of schools, can be a little bit out of whack. And so let's talk about that. Is that a problem? Is that not a problem? How does that get addressed if we don't split? How does it get addressed if we do split? So we're starting with you guys on the opposed here first. So 2 minutes.
So the question, can you clarify the question really quick?
Yeah, so it's representation, kind of the imbalance of the number of students that a board member is kind of represented.
Yeah, and I don't know the technicality of this question. Wendy knows better. As far as there are other ways to increase representation. They could actually add board members so for example, if it ends up being a two-way split and the list goes and we stay together, you could actually have 9 board members if you want. Is that accurate?
They changed the law.
They changed the law, I'm not sure what it was that was added.
Yeah, so currently we have 7, but my understanding, and I know that I don't know this for sure, but I didn't think this is right. You could actually increase representation now, and you could have literally by population or by community, right? You could actually have 2 for each community. I think there's some leeway on how you could actually increase representation in those ways. Obviously, splitting is going to increase representation. If you stay at 7 each, the West would have 7, Central would have 7, and the South would have 7. So that does address that. But there are other ways to do that as well, if the Central and the South would stay together.
So I do have numbers because Orem has a lower student population. The way the representation is determined is by residents. And so they're all roughly equal representation. Right now, it's 1 board member to 60,000 people. I believe that the legislature for the House is 30,000. Virtually every year that I was on the Alpine School Board, my district was bigger than my state House rep. It's hard to be a local representative. Right now, in Orem, we have Ada Wilson and Sarah Hacken that are board members there. They represent, Ada represents 7,400 students. Sarah represents 9,300 students. Out west, Joylyn Lincoln represents 15,000, so that's double. And Julie King represents 14,000 students. And in the central area, we have 12,000 and 14,000 and 11,000. So what that actually means is if we stay, even if we're to expand to 9, and I'm not sure that we would qualify for 9 because I think there's a population thing on the 9, Alpine School District would have wanted to change. But if you go ahead with the representation with 7 board members for the central and south area, it does give Orem an outsized level per student because they don't have the high levels of student population. So what Michelle was saying about the West is that most likely Orem would be dictating what's going on in the rest of the district. Or very closely, they would probably have 2 or 3 board members. But they would have far fewer students that they each represent, far fewer schools.
I'm just going to add on there. Even if you increase board members to 9, the ratio is still the same. So we would not get the representation, we would not get a majority, we would still be led along by the East. The other thing to consider when you pointed out how many students the board members in the West represent, if we could shrink that down, we would have a lot more accountability and the board members would understand the needs of their schools and check.
Great, 1 minute.
So I think mathematically it's impossible that the ratio would be the same because if you had 9 members in what would be about 65% of what the district is now, that would be significantly better ratio. And then secondly, what did you say about that?
I've said a lot.
Yeah. So anyway, you said Orem might still have an outsized voice. I think that would be up to the board to determine, because it seems like that that board, and again, I don't know the answer to this for sure, but I would assume that board would have the ability to say, we're going to split it equally by population, so.
That's the county that determines it.
It's
by population. Yeah, it's by population, and so the county determines the board seats. And so what I'm saying is that because of Orem's population, they would have more representation than, so you probably, even if you went to 9 board members, and again, I don't know, because the 7, some school districts have 5, and after a certain amount, then you can get to 7. So my guess is after a certain amount, you get to 9. So I don't know if you qualify for 9 at that
I'm pretty sure right now, because of the size of Alpine, they can do 9 right now if they choose.
They can do 9 right now, it's Alpine. I don't know if we split and get rid of, if that qualifies.
If they'd still be at the level, okay.
May I make just one quick point?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Really, when I vote for a board member, I vote for someone that's going to represent the needs in the district. And I think we get really tied up when we start thinking about, well, they only represent this area, they only represent this area. I know Wendy, when she was on the board, she represented the Alpine School District. And she had a special interest in the area that elected her. If our board gets so tied up on I only represent these schools, then probably what's the point of having a school board to begin with?
Oh, you guys give a little response.
Yes and no. Yes, you have to represent the needs of all of the individuals, but back to my example about how the Lone Peak area has basically not had bond funding to a very large degree, because the needs were there, but they did not rise to the level of the rest of the district. So yes, as a board member, I have to consider that. That was also why we were willing to close Sarah Park and Hillcrest in Orem. But I felt uncomfortable with that, because if Orem wants to keep those small schools, they should be able to. But I can't balance out their small class sizes with the East having 40 kids in a classroom. And I think when we get down to more local needs, you're going to start to see that the central district is going to take care of its needs very well, and Orem will be able to make that decision, and Vineyard and Linden and PG, how they want to accommodate. Do they want to increase their taxes in order to have those smaller schools? I don't want to make that decision. Or do they want to choose to close certain schools and move the kids other places? So I think when you're a representative, you do have to advocate for the people who elected you, because nobody else will.
Okay, so when under the question here.
I have a quick technical question on that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just how board members are elected, is it based on total population or adult population?
Okay, yeah, so the question is how board members are elected and how those districts are determined. And I'm pretty sure it's by total
I
population.
think it's total population.
It's basically the same formula that they're used for house districts, like state house districts, congressional districts, state senate districts, state school board districts are all based upon total population. And they work to balance them. So, and like I mentioned before, the reason we have kind of these numbers, when you look at it one way, the representation is equal because it's all based on population. If you look at it on the total number of students served, it's a lot of whack, right? So it depends on how you look at it. And, you can't say one way is better than the other, they're different metrics. Okay, so the next question. We talked a little bit earlier on, it was brought up, and so someone had asked about school sizes, classroom sizes. okay? Number of students in a classroom. So the question I want to pose is, how will a split either help or hurt classroom sizes in whatever specific districts, or how will not splitting help classroom sizes? I believe, did we start with you guys last time? we'll start with you guys this time. I think it's your turn to start.
All right, so my daughter, I actually texted her 2 nights ago and said, how many kids do you have? She said she has 256 kids. That averages out to 36.8 or something, 37. That's a lot of kids. And she's an English teacher, so she's trying to get feedback. So it's even worse, right? I think, quite honestly, that's a question you can't answer here effectively, because that is going to be, like Wendy's alluding to, that's going to be a decision of the board of whatever district gets formed to say our priority is going to be here, here, or here. So I think, quite honestly, I don't know that we can answer that here, except to say that would be a decision that the board would have to focus on to say, if you want to affect class sizes, then that's going to have to be a problem. And then the cost, right? As far as the operating costs, this is what happened a few years ago. When you take operating budgets, 92% of the operating budget was in people. And so it's really hard to lower class size because it means you have to hire a lot of people, right? And so it's everyone wants lower class sizes, but actually making it happen is difficult because it's expensive. So it would have to go to that board, but I don't think we can say that the split is going to change that except that the board decide.
I would agree that most of that is going to be based on the board issue of what the priorities are, but I think it would definitely help in the growing areas where they can actually get bonds passed to build schools that they need, because they are rushing into cities, they are overcrowded. I've heard horror stories about kids going to Trinity class early, not because they love their class, but they need to see just it. So I think in that way it would help, but otherwise it probably isn't.
I think where we might see, and again, it goes back to that local control issue. So at one point, again, I'm 6 years off of the school board, so my numbers way back. But when we were looking at, different school closures and things in Aurora, one of the schools had a second, third grade split class, so they didn't have enough students to even fill an entire, and then there were like 15 or 18 kids in the class, which honestly I think we all like. But you're balancing that out with the 40 kids on the east side of 36 kids, and English teachers especially, we want more class sizes for them because they have to do papers. That's different for band where they want more kids. So, but I think, like in Orem, one of the issues with lower class sizes is, do you have a place to put them? So in the Orem area, they might have the ability to lower class sizes because they have places to put them, whereas on the east side, they're going to have to bond. And in the center, we're kind of in that middle area where there may be areas where we do have extra spaces. Luby isn't one of them. But there may be areas in some of our elementary schools, for example, where we may have lower class sizes or be able to put priorities there. The problem is when you're looking at that equity across the district and you've got that disparity, it's much harder to make those kinds of decisions because you'll look at it and say, if we lower class sizes by 1, that's not going to impact everybody, to a large degree. But if you were able to lower it by 5 in a specific area, that might be different. So I think you have greater flexibility.
Yeah, and just to clarify, even now schools are actually funded by their population, so they're actually funded with the exact same ratio. So just because a school is big doesn't mean that their class sizes are any bigger than a school that's small. If that makes sense, because it's all based on this number of teachers for that number of students. But everything else, class size is a constant. everybody wants to lower class size. And my daughter and my wife are great for that, like English teachers, but it really is, that would be up to them.
1 minute.
And it's
You guys want to what? You got 1 minute.
Go off topic. No, if you want to stay on topic, no, I think we're agreeing, everybody wants low class sizes, but in my opinion, this just gives the opportunity for these big boards, if that becomes the priority of the central district or for the south district, then, you know, they can make a case. I know recently, again, focusing on Highland, you know, we talk about how Highland doesn't pass bonds, but they increase the cost for police and fire, right? You make the case for the people, and the people will say, yeah, we actually want that. And I think when you're not painting everybody with a big broad brush, I think you're going to be able to make it a little bit more strategic, more, you know, surgery by scalpel, not, you know, a big broad paint brush. So I think there's a very hope and chance for small classes.
Okay, I think we've kind of covered the questions. I checked to make sure we have any more questions from those that are attending here. So we'll go to kind of some wrap-up summary from each side, and I believe the floor side gets to go first on this one. So we'll give you 2 minutes to just kind of summarize your argument as to why we should be voting for Prop 11.
Hey, moderator, can I add a question?
We're kind of out of time.
Sure, why not?
But you want to hear his question?
Yes.
I want to hear this question.
Okay,
Sure.
let him ask a question.
Sorry, hopefully it's pretty, want to say it or? Yeah, well, it was stated that those that are most hurt will be those who can least afford it. I'd like to know who would be most hurt by the split.
Okay, so the question is, it was stated that those that could be hurt by the split the most would be those that can least afford it. So, explain how it is those that are, you know, that least can afford it will be hurt the most by a split.
It's really interesting, and we see it in all aspects of life, that people that need the most advocacy are the ones that have the least. Our special ed populations quite often don't have that advocacy. And I mentioned this, that there is no special school in the area. And I appreciate, you know, I love that my kids have been taken care of. I love that this idea of a central district makes a lot of sense. But then I still have to ask myself, well, who's my neighbor? Well, I have neighbors in Hart. And those Title I schools, Title I school means it's based on one of the free and reduced lunch is one of those factors, that it's a population with low socioeconomics. And they take greater resources because they need additional help to achieve academically. And so those populations are not spread effectively throughout the district. They reside in certain areas. And so when we talk about who does this hurt, well, it doesn't hurt the Central District. You know what, the Central District's going to be fine. Do we have some of those needs here? Yes, but as pointed out, Central District's been pretty good about taking care of you.
And just one other thing, again, anytime you split and go to a small district, it's going to cost more. And so it's honestly going to depend on each area. Are you willing to raise those taxes to keep even just the same level of services? And so I think that's an important thing to do. And if they are, like, I'm willing, but I'm not confident that Utah Valley generally, they bristle at the idea of raising taxes.
So I don't accept as an axiom that that will occur, that I think we see in society that sometimes that's the case, and I know nationally the idea is that because people are in minority communities, for example, that they have fewer resources.
And the way that education funding nationally occurs, I grew up in California and it's straight property tax based, or it was, they have changed. And so, yes, lower socioeconomic communities fared more poorly in educational resources. Utah is the most equalized education funding state in the nation. At least it was a handful of years ago, and I'm assuming it still is. We pay income taxes so that every single student, and almost 100% of our income tax, they changed it recently. Used to be able to say 100% of our income taxes went to education. Almost all of our income taxes go to education to educate every single student throughout the state of Utah. Where we will see a change is in the bonding areas. And again, because of these financial studies, we have seen that they have the capability to be able to fund and maintain those areas. Title I funding is a federal program, and right now there are Westside kids that qualify for Title I funding that are not getting it because Alpine School District sends pretty much all its Title I funding to the Orem areas. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and they have the right to do that. Those kids in Orem will still get qualify for Title I funding, will still get that federal funding. That doesn't change. What will change is the ability for the different districts to choose to focus specifically on those areas that are needed. And again, in special ed, you're going to see differences with the special ed communities if there are, say, more dyslexic kids in a particular area. You're going to see more of that capability focus there. So I think you're going to see a little bit more strategic and focused response when you're looking at things.
Yeah, Wendy mentioned that, most of the money goes for Title I. Title I is poverty, federal money, money for poverty from the federal government. The reason it goes to schools in Orem is because Orem has more schools that have a significant level of poverty. And if this district dissolves, they will not have those same level of resources. I was in Orem for 21 years. I was the principal of Orem Junior High School. My wife currently teaches at Orem Junior High School. My daughter teaches at Timberland. Those are the two polar opposites. And I'll tell you, there are significant differences between the needs of the students. And so there could absolutely be schools that don't get the same resources. And a school in poverty needs more resources than a school that's not in poverty.
One minute. There you get 1 minute.
Okay, I take issue that he was my neighbor, it's not just one. We have needs throughout the district. The west is going off, that's where you're taking most of the Title I funding. That area, taking it down to Orem. Those residents feel that, they feel the pain, take the money from the kids that need it there. Our neighbors are all over the place. Here in Lehi, you say the Central Region is fine. I'm an elected representative. I talk to my constituents. I've heard the stories. I visited Fox Hollow Elementary. They talked about how many different languages they got to deal with in this elementary school. They were proud they had an award for the Spanish library that they created there. They had needs there. I talked to the students in Lehi Elementary. They were facing the majority in the East deciding whether or not to close that. That was harmful for the students and the teachers there. So no, the Central will not be just fine if we're stuck with the East side and their majority making decisions for our residents.
Great. That was a good question. Okay, so let's go to our kind of summary statements, a couple minutes for each side. And we'll be starting with the for side, and so 2 minutes.
So the programs in the central area, I think we're very highly based. I think what we need to look at is what are the advantages of these differences that we can take and customize these districts for our own. And I also think it's important that we start with the assumption that the West is going to lead, because that's basically a foregone conclusion. The question remaining for us with Prop 11 is
Is it better for us to stay together with the Orem Vineyard in the south, or is it better to split up? And are the needs different? And I would say that the growth that Lehi has experienced and this area is different than what you're looking at with PG and Linton and Orem. And again, what you said, Orem does have special needs with, their declining enrollment and with their Title I funding. The Title I funding will, those students will still get those Title I funds, but I believe that they will be able to focus them more accurately on where those needs actually are. And the bottom line is you will have better representation across the board for everybody involved. And that will go from, 1 in 60,000 to 1 in, if we have a central district, 49, 45. So we're going to go down to 1 board member for 5,000 students as opposed to 1 board member, I guess, per student is 1 in 12,000. And I think that's very, very important. First of all, as a city council member, I have no doubt on this fight. It will not affect me, will not diminish my power, my authority, will not affect my job. I looked at this, as I think the rest of the council members and mayors in 10 different cities, is what's best for the residents, what's best for our students, what is most equitable for each area, not just one particular area. We hear a lot about economy of scales and benefits having a super large district. Well, there's also such a thing as a diseconomy of scales. You can get too big. Think of the big box next doors and the kind of customer service you get there versus the local store. And I think if we divide up our problems and we do it, there's been such great collaboration between the West and the Central District. It's just been amazing. But I think if we divide up our problems, then they're going to be more manageable. We're going to be able to address it. The West is going to address their needs. The East are going to decide if they want to keep those small schools open or close them. They get to make their own decisions. Their dollars get to stay with their own residents. And I think it would be better, those issues, there are issues and there are problems, and they'll be better addressed locally with local dollars.
Great. Great news. 3 minutes, because I took about 3 minutes.
Thank you. And thanks for all the comments. I appreciate this. Appreciate this opportunity. We talked a lot about representation, talked a lot about finances, we talked a lot about those things. And honestly, it's a little hard for me because to me, education is still always about what's best for kids. And at the end of the day, kids are going to be well taken care of because we have fantastic employees. Teachers in classrooms will take care of kids. Administrators at schools will take care of kids. And I hope the kids don't feel this. But to say that there'll be an equality or equity, it's interesting that they talk about how financially this all works for everybody. And the reason they say that is because, well, there's always money. You can always tax people more to get the things that you're going to lose when we split. And it's an interesting thought. Well, yeah, there is an answer to this. It's more money. Or we can continue to provide excellent education and we already do.
Joe? Yeah, so again, we are not against a split, but we would, and then what I would say is at this point, I'm not against a split, but I'm going to vote no on the split. Part of that is because of the way it's been presented. If you look at the voter guide, the first heading for the for argument says tax savings. The first words on the against argument says splitting entity means taxes go up. Both of those things can't be realistic in the same universe. And I think I would vote for this if we're saying it is going to cost more. And here's why it's worth it. But you have to know going in that it is going to cost more. I'm willing to do that as a taxpayer. I'm not confident that every Utah County, that Utah County is willing to do that, just partly because of history and everything else. The other thing I would just encourage people to go do your own homework, look at the stuff on the website. I had a fascinating experience yesterday. I got a text from an 85-year-old woman on my board who sent me a text. She had done her homework, and she went through and looked at it, and she says, you know, I'd like your perspective on this, but kind of here's what I'm thinking. I'd love to read that to you, but I won't for time's sake. But go do your own homework. And just know that, you know, whatever happens, this central area is going to be solid. I mean, I think we're saying, I think we agree with that. But it's going to be, you know, it's going to be different depending on how it splits.
Great. Thank you so much for our panelists, Michelle, Wendy, Kevin, Joe. Really appreciate it. Honestly, from my opinion, of all the different events I've gone to, those are one of the better ones. I think you really dug into some really good aspects and really good perspectives of the issues. And hopefully people will take that, utilize that, and kind of obey those and make the best decision when they go to the ballot box. So thank you guys for coming, and we appreciate you. We'll be around for a little bit. We do need to be, you know, kind of cleared out here probably in another half hour or so, but thanks so much, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.
You guys should get a candy bar or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.